Hi, and welcome back to our series Backgammon Basics here on DragTheBar. I'm Bill Roberti again, your instructor for the series. Now, last time in episode 4, we learned how to play a game plan known as the Blitz. And we saw the power of a quick early attack before your opponent can establish an anchor, which, combined with a little luck, can lead to a closeout and a gammon win worth 4 points. Now, in this episode, we're going to go back to the start of the game and take a look at how to play some of the replies to the various opening rolls. Now, in episode 3, we learned how to play the opening rolls, and we saw that while some opening rolls were forced, most of the others offered a wide scope for individual style. For example, here with this 4-3 roll for black, on the opening roll we actually saw several different ways to play it. Here's a situation after black has played it by pulling two men down, 13 to 9 and 13 to 10. But in addition, he had some other choices. He could split the back men 24 to 20 and play 13 to 10. That's perfectly good. And he could also split the back men with 24 to 21 and play 13 to 9, and that's also good. Even though these rolls all lead to different sorts of game plans, in terms of their equity or their basic value, they're really all the same. They're extremely close. Now, once your opponent has made an opening play, he's really started to create the character of the game. And whatever he did, he altered the position in some important way, and your reply is going to have to take that into account. You're not going to have the same choices, the same sort of wide open choices to do what you like as you did on the opening roll. Instead, you're going to have to look at what he did, figure out how that affects the game, and realize that some of the choices you might have made before he had made a play now really just don't work. So now you're actually starting to play real backgammon. You've got to analyze the specific features of the position, you've got to formulate a plan, and then you've got to make a play that fits that plan. So let's get started. We'll take a look at a lot of typical situations that arise on the second roll, and we'll see just how you're supposed to play them. Okay, let's take a look at our first key idea here. We're looking at a position where white won the opening roll, and obviously he rolled a 4-3, and he brought two checkers down here to try to build some new points. Now, the first key idea on the second roll is that you may be able to hit. Unlike the opening roll, where all the checkers are safe and no hits are possible, whatever your opponent did may well have given you a chance to hit some blots. And in general, you want to do that. If you can hit somewhere, that's almost certainly going to be the right play, even if the alternative is making a good point somewhere. For example, let's suppose that in this position black rolls a 5-3. Now, we saw in the opening roll that the best way to play a 5-3 is to take two checkers and make your 3-point. Very nice. And black could do that here as well, but he's got something better to do. By playing one of his back men the whole roll, 8 pips, he can take a checker from the 24-point, move it out here to the 16, and hit white's blot. And that's what he ought to do by playing the number like that. Now, if it's not clear why that's best, here's how you want to think about it. Let's go back for a second. Suppose that black had, in fact, made his 3-point. Okay, now what's going to happen here? Well, white obviously has a tremendous collection of builders. A lot of his numbers are going to make a new point. Let's say that he followed up with a 5-2 and made the 4-point. At this point, basically we're in a pretty much even game. Black made a point, white made a point. Chances are pretty even. That's really the best you can hope for if you make a point with a 5-3. However, if you just hit, if you hit with the 5-3, producing this position, well, now black is a favorite because he's hit a checker, he's sent it back 16 pips, he's taken a lead in the race, And that's really all that's going on. Nobody's made any points yet. Black has a lead in the race. He must be a favorite. So that's why when you can hit, you almost always want to do that, even if the alternative is making a good point. Okay, now here's our second example. White again won the opening roll, and this time it looks like he started with a 2-1, and he made one of our recommended plays. He played a checker from the 12 to the 14 point, another checker from the 19 to the 20 point, slotting the 20 point, trying to make it. Now suppose that black follows up with a 3-1. Well, once again, on the opening roll of a 3-1, the play is clear to just make your own 5 point. Tremendously strong point. But here, black is going to do something different. He's just going to play his back man, one of his back men, 4 pips forward, and hit the blot on the 20 point. Like that. And again, the reason is just the same as before. If he hits the blot, he takes the lead in the race, and therefore black is the favorite. It's good to be ahead in the race. If he doesn't do that, if he sits back and instead just makes his 5 point, then white on his turn will probably follow up and make his 5 point. And again, we just have an even game. And you'd rather be a favorite than be even, so the hitting variations are better than the point-making variations. Now here's our third example. Okay, this time white opened with a roll of 6-2 and made our recommended play. He broke the 6 from the back point, trying to establish the bar point here if he gets lucky. And with the 2, he brought down a builder. Now suppose that black rolls a 6-5. Well, our recommended opening play of a 6-5 was to run out a back checker, but here the hit is better, and in fact black can do something very dynamic here. He can play the 6 down to the bar point, hitting white's checker, and then with the 5 he can play the 5 from the 6 point to the 1 point, hitting another checker. So he ends up, after he's played his roll, in a position like this. And this is very strong for black. He's hit 2 checkers, so white in effect is going to lose his whole next turn. He's going to have to use the entire roll to come in from the bar. If he rolls a number containing a 6, it's even worse for him. Suppose, for instance, that his next roll is another 6-2, and let's make that a white 6-2, like that. Well, all he can do with a 6-2 is just play 1 checker in from the bar like that. And now it's possible that black can actually get a blitz going. So it's always very strong to hit 2 checkers early in the game, and that's just what black has done here. And as a result, he's got off to a nice start, and he's taken the edge away from white and given it back to himself. Now here's another slightly different example of the power of hitting on the second roll. White won the opening roll. He rolled a 4-1, and he played a 4 down from the midpoint, and he split his back men. And again, we think that's a good opening play of a 4-1. And now let's give black exactly the same number, a 4-1. Now black could do the same thing that white did. He could play a checker down from the midpoint, split his back men. That's an okay play, but it still leaves the initiative in white's hands, because white now has a lot of rolls that will make a new point, a lot of rolls that will hit the blot out here. And we want to ask ourselves, is there anything better we can do than just sort of go along with white's plans? And the answer is yes, we can. In fact, we can just start hitting. We can use the 4 to play from 6 to 2, sending this checker up on the bar. And then with the ace, we can keep it going from 2 to 1. And again, we've hit both white's checkers. We've taken away his whole next roll. He's going to have to use it to come in from the bar. And in essence, we've put the initiative back in our hands with this double hit. A passive play would have kept the initiative with white. This very active double hit play gives the initiative to us. Okay, so hitting is a very important idea, And those last few examples should sort of bring that home. In general, in the opening, you're struggling for good points, you're trying to gain ground in the race. All that means you're going to spend a lot of time hitting. Now let's now take a look at something else that doesn't come up on the opening roll, and that is throwing doubles. You can't throw a double on the opening roll because the game starts with the two players each rolling one die, and the opening roll goes to the player who rolls the higher dice. The dice have to be different. But on the second roll, you roll two dice, and you can surely roll doubles. So let's take a look at some of the best ways to play the typical doubles that can come up. Now, in this position, white won the opening roll and must have rolled a 5-2 and brought two checkers down. That's fine. And now let's take a look here. We'll set up this position and we'll see how black plays all his different doubles. Start with double ones, the smallest, and that's a very easy play. He takes two checkers from the 6 point, makes the 5 point. Takes two checkers from the 8, moves him to the 7. Now he's made a block of 3 points in a row. He's made two of the most important points, the 5 point and the 7 point. Notice that white's rear checkers are now starting to get blocked in. They can't roll a 4, a 5, or a 6 to get out, so he's in a little bit of trouble there. There's a little bit of a risk associated with this play, namely black has left a blot 7 pips away, so if white does roll a 1-6, a 2-5, or a 3-4, he can hit. And those numbers are good for him, but there aren't that many of them, and this is a risk well worth taking. So that's the best play with an opening double one here. Now let's change that and make it double twos. And again, there's a best play here with double twos. But first let's take a look at a kind of instructive error. The way you'll sometimes see people playing double twos is they'll take their two back men and they'll move them up 4 pips each and make the defensive 20 point. Now, if defense were your only object, that's a fine play. You get a strong point, you make the best possible anchor, you prevent white from making that point in his turn. But unfortunately, backgammon's a game of balance. You don't just want to attack, you don't just want to defend, you want to pick a play that has the best balance of all your goals. And it turns out that while that's a great defensive play, black has an even better attacking play. And the right way to play double twos is to take two checkers off the 6 point, move them to the 4, and two checkers off the 13 point and move them to the 11. Now, this play is purely attack, but it's such a strong attacking play. It makes two good points. It threatens to fill in the 5 and the 7 very quickly. Maybe black will even make the 9 or something, or the 3. This is such a strong, aggressive front formation that it's worth disregarding the chance to make a good defense and just throw everything into the attack. If you're going to go all attack or all defense, you want to pick the play that's the best overall. And in this case, the attacking chances from this are much stronger than the defensive chances over here, even though that's a very good defensive play. So that's how you'd play a double two. And now let's move on and take a look at how we'd play double three. Now actually with a double three, black has a couple of choices and they're both very strong. One choice is the purely aggressive attacking play, which is to make 2 innerboard points. Nothing wrong with that. It's a very good move. The other play, which is a little better, I think, is to do a little defense, a little attack. To come up with 2 checkers and make the 21 point. There's your defense. You've now got an anchor. And then to bring down 2 checkers from the midpoint down and make the 10. And what this does is it creates a lot of new rolls next turn to make the 5 point, the 4 point, the 7 point, even the 3 point. So here you get a more balanced play, good defense, and good attack. By the way, you could get sort of the same thing if you came up, made this anchor, and made your 3-point. That's not a bad play. And you could also come up and take 2 checkers and make your 5-point. That's not a bad play either. But people think pretty strongly now that the best play is this very balanced play, creating a good anchor, a good outside point, and good building opportunities. Now let's move on, take a look at the next double, which is double fours. And double four is a pretty clear roll here. It's a tremendously strong roll. You can't really misplay it too much, but there is a right way to handle this. And it's analogous to the double 3 roll. You want to move your 2 backmen up, grab the best possible anchor, and then you want to take 2 checkers from your midpoint, make the 9-point, which is a pretty good point, and again create a position that easily gets better because there are lots of new building opportunities coming up to make these somewhat more crucial points. So that's a pretty easy play. It's very, very strong. Gives you a solid advantage if you roll that on the opening turn. Sorry, as the reply to the opening turn. Okay, now let's take a look at our next double here. Again, white has started with an opening 5-2, played 2 men down. And now we looked at double fours. Let's look at double fives next. Now, unfortunately, double fives is actually just about the weakest double you can roll at the start of the game. Its one virtue is it's a lot of pips. You get to move 20 pips. But if you look around the board, unfortunately, your backmen are blocked by white's stack here, 5 pips away. And your frontmen are also blocked because white owns your 1-point. So there's not very much you can do with this roll at all. In fact, as long as white owns your 1-point, the only plausible play with double fives is to take 2 men from the midpoint, and at least you get to make your 3-point, and at least you gain some ground in the race. But positionally, it's a very awkward roll, not nearly as strong as the other doubles. Now, of course, if white had split his backmen with anything, let's take a look at, let's say he'd somehow moved a checker to here, then you're almost always going to play double fives by making your 1-point, making your 3-point, and trying to start a blitz. But that assumes, of course, that white has broken, in fact, the anchor on the 1-point. In that case, the blitz is very strong. Okay, now let's take a look at the last double, which is a very strong double, double sixes. Pretty much the best roll you can throw here as a reply to white's opening roll. And there's only one good play with it. It's very simple. You take your 2 backmen off the 24-point, put them on the 18, making a great defensive anchor. You take your 2 men from the midpoint and make the 7, making a good blocking point. So you make 2 good points. You get 24 pips in the race, which is as much as you possibly can. So this is just a terrific shot, guarantees black an advantage for some time to come. Okay, now let's take a look at our next idea, which is what do we do when our opponent starts off and actually makes a strong point? For example, white wins the opening roll, he shoots a 3-1, and he makes his 5-point. How do we adjust to this? And basically there's a pretty simple answer here. If your opponent makes a point like the 5-point or the 4-point, some very strong blocking point, starts to hem in your backmen, the answer is you got to get your backmen moving. White is well on the way to actually establishing a blockade. You've got to mobilize your backmen before the blockade happens, and you can't wait, because if you wait, if you do, for instance, the next roll we'll take a look at is what happens if black rolls a 4-3 in response to this 3-1. And if you wait, if you try making building plays, the trouble is that white then brings down more checkers into his outer board, creates still more builders, and at every point in the future, splitting your backmen, trying to get them going, will get progressively more dangerous. So you don't wait. There's basically no time like the present here. Yes, it's a little more dangerous to split because white has a better board, but it doesn't matter because white's position is just going to keep getting stronger. So with the 4-3, the play that you make here is to split your backmen with the 3 and bring the 4 down with the builder. And that way you're immediately trying to establish an anchor and essentially trying to provoke a fight. If white attacks you, well, that's okay. Maybe you'll hit him back. But you're trying to get something going before you get hemmed in even further. Now we'll go back to the same position where white starts with a 3-1. And let's take a look at how black should play a 2-1. And remember, on the opening roll, we said that there were a couple of different plays with the 2-1. There was the perfectly acceptable play of slotting the 5-point, taking a little risk to try to make a good blocking point. And there was also the perfectly acceptable play of splitting the backmen. Now, once white has made his 5-point, however, your 20-point in the diagram, there's not really a choice here anymore. It's too dangerous to make the slotting play because if white hits you, you're now coming in not on a 1-point board but on a 2-point board. So you'd be actually 4 times as likely to throw a number that would stay out. And since these two plays were very close at the beginning of the game, the answer now is they're not really that close anymore. And the whole idea of splitting and mobilizing your backmen comes to the fore. So the play you want to make here with the 2-1 is to bring down a builder for a little building action, but also split your backmen, hoping next turn maybe you'll get one to the outfield, or you'll make the 4-point with a 3-2, or maybe you'll make the bar point with a 6-5, but you'll get something going. White builds a strong point, you mobilize your backmen. And now the last example on this theme is what happens if you roll a number like 6-4. Now, 6-4 was another play where we said at the start of the game you had a bunch of choices on the opening roll. You could make this play, come out and down, very nice, get some defense, get some building over here. You could run one checker all the way out, good for the race. And you could even, under some circumstances, just make your 2-point. Well, as you might expect, now that white has made his 5-point, everything has changed a little bit, and those 3 plays aren't really toss-ups anymore. Now there's only one good play with the 6-4, and that's the simple running play. Again, trying to get your backmen moving, trying to disengage, trying to make sure that white can't complete the process of blocking you in. You want to get that going as soon as possible. So the 6-4, you just run out to the 14-point, and now you're in pretty good shape. If white misses you, you can bring that checker around, you've escaped a checker, and you've started to get some building going on your own. And now let's look at something yet a little more different. What happens if white starts the game with one of his good building rolls, like a 4-3 in this case? He brought 2 men down from the midpoint, and you don't hit him. You do something else. So let's see. Suppose black now throws a 4-3 on his own. How should he respond to this? Well, this is a little different still. The basic rule here is that if your opponent builds on his opening roll, you want to build on your opening roll. Basically, you want to sort of match what he did. By the same token, if he splits on his opening roll, you probably want to split on your opening roll. Now, let's see why that's true. When you split your back checkers, you take some risk that your opponent will attack you, start hitting you, maybe get a blitz going, which of course you don't like. Now, in the opening position, the chances of that aren't that great. And because they're not that great, it's perfectly okay to split with numbers like 4-3. However, when white pulls 2 more builders down, he's now got a lot of ammunition aimed at this part of the board, and that means your splitting has become more dangerous. And because it's become more dangerous, you want to pay attention instead to the building variations. So when you roll a 4-3 in response to his 2 men down, your best play is to play 2 men down yourself. And here's another example of that theme. White started the game with a 5-2, pulled 2 men down, and now black gets a 3-2. And on the opening roll, we said there were two good ways to play a 3-2. One was the split and come down, and the other was just 2 men down for building. And as you might expect, now that white has played, these two plays aren't equal anymore. Once again, it's a little too dangerous to split. Because white, instead of having 8 checkers in this general part of the board bearing on his inner board, now he has 10. And that little extra attacking potential, represented by the 2 extra checkers, is enough so that these two plays aren't equivalent anymore. The splitting play got more dangerous because white has more attackers in range. And on the other hand, the building play, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The value of the building play hasn't changed a bit because white hasn't done anything over here. So whereas the splitting and the building were equivalent on the opening roll, once white brings down more builders, more attackers, now the building roll is better, the splitting roll is less good. And now let's look at one last idea here before we wrap things up. White won the opening roll. This time he won it with a 6-3, and he made one of our recommended plays. He split his backbend with the 6, trying to make an anchor out here, and he brought a builder down with the 3. Now suppose we roll a 6-4 in reply. Now that's a pretty good shot. With the 6, we're clearly going to hit him and send him to the bar. So that part's very clear. Now the question is, what do we want to do with the 4? And the answer is we've got a couple of possibilities. We don't want to move any of these checkers into the inner board. It doesn't really make any sense to move 7 to 3 with the 4. That just makes this checker more likely to get hit. And besides, we'd rather have the 7-point than the 3-point. So forget about that. But what we could do instead is we could play a 4 from the midpoint, which gives us a checker attacking our inner board. Or we could split our backbend, trying to use the fact that white's on the bar. He's going to have to spend half his roll coming in next turn to give us a little tempo and make it possible maybe for us to get the anchor on the 20-point. Now, question, which of those two plays is better? And the answer is it depends on what point we could split to over on this side of the board. Now in this case, we're splitting to a great point, a point we really want, the best anchor on the board if we can get it. And that makes this the correct play with a 6-4. If the anchor you can split to is very strong, that's what you want to do. Forget about the building play here. But suppose instead of that we had rolled instead 6-2. Now the 6 again we're going to hit here on the bar just like we did before, but the 2 is a little different. If we split with the 2, we're splitting to the 22-point. That's an okay anchor, but a little on the feeble side. We're not real excited if next turn we get to make the 22-point. That's not going to make our day. However, if we use the 2 as a builder, that's a really good position for a builder. It's very safe. It's very hard for white to hit this checker from the bar. And at the same time, it bears on the inner board. So it's a more useful builder than this deuce would be as an anchor builder. And that means with a 6-2, the right play is to hit and to play 13 to 11. Okay, now let's kind of recap what we've just seen in this lesson. First of all, in the reply to the opening roll, hitting is crucial. It's very strong to hit. You want to hit. If you have a chance to hit and you don't, you really have to have a very, very good reason for not hitting. Typically, the only kind of non-hits that really come up in this case are cases where you could hit a single checker deep in your board, and you don't really want to do that because that kind of puts a checker out of play. But as for the rest of it, whether it's hitting checkers out here, hitting checkers where he split to try to make an anchor, hitting is crucial, hitting's very good, and that's what you almost always want to do. Now, our second main point was doubles. The reply to the opening roll is the first time you get to roll a double. When you roll a double, they're almost always very strong, as we saw, and you really want to make sure you understand what the best plays are with doubles, because you don't want to roll a great number and then misplay it. Now, when your opponent makes a strong point, as we saw, when your opponent starts off the game with something like a 3-1 making his 5-point, or maybe he started with a 4-2 making his 4-point. When your opponent makes a strong point like that, you really need to split in response. You really, at that point, want to get your back checkers moving, try to get somebody up to here, or maybe up to here, so you get an anchor, and in some sense neutralize White's advantage of starting with such a good point. And the last crucial point that we made was that on the reply to the opening roll, you more or less want to emulate what your opponent did in terms of building and splitting. If he brought down builders, you want to bring down builders. If he split, you want to split. That's a very good general rule. It'll cover an awful lot of cases where two plays sort of look the same. You're trying to decide between them. Take a look at what your opponent did and to some extent try to copy it. Okay, now that wraps up our lesson on replying to the opening roll. In our next episode, we're going to take another look at a game plan. This time it's going to be the game plan called a holding game, which is very common, much more common than blitzes actually. When both sides start off splitting their backmen, which you see a lot, they often both get an advanced anchor. And when they both get an advanced, what happens there, when both sides get an advanced anchor, what you get is a sort of a waiting game from that point where each side holds on to their anchor, they play around it, and basically they wait for something really opportune to happen, like a big double that lets them move their anchor around the board. But what makes this kind of game important is that it happens so often, and you really need to know how to play it. So that's what we'll look at next time. Now, remember that if you want to try some online backgammon, a good site is Black Chip Poker, which is part of the Merge network. And they accept American players, and you can sign up here on DragTheBar through the My Account page. And don't forget to sign up for Rakeback when you join. Until then, this is Bill Roberti signing off for DragTheBar.